So I don't want to sugarcoat this to anyone, that this is something that you can do overnight. But if it might be interesting, I'd be happy to get tactical and start diving into what that process out of recruitment and into product management look like.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. Let's pull that thread a little bit further then. So, because there was, I think, at least one role between those pieces, like maybe talk us through that realization or that experience of starting out that journey, and what were the pitfalls and what were the learnings, and how did you eventually arrive in the promised land?
Absolutely. And I think my first bit of advice to anyone who's, whether it's product management or something else, is go and immerse yourself in that world. There's no shortage of people telling you what books to read to do these things. And so that is absolutely a starting point, because understanding how the job is done in practice. And I actually think my advice would be is like, go out and get books that are designed for people who already do the job. And it doesn't matter that some of it might not make sense. Just keep reading it. Like I remember reading a book called like User Story Mapping. That's like the second book I read about product management, which is like a tactical thing you do in the day-to-day as a product manager. I won't bore your audience with what it is, and Dale and I, I'm sure, could go on about this for ages. But what it is doesn't matter. What was important was it didn't make sense to me. And I just started jumping around the book, like reading different parts of it. But it gave me an understanding of what the job feels like to do. It doesn't matter that this is like kind of an instruction manual for people who already know what they're doing. It actually gave me more of an insight than some of what we might call the high level kind of philosophical books about discipline that are kind of manifestos about how it ought to be done. I would say you want to strike a balance. You want to read some of those kind of manifesto style books, but you also want to read some cookbooks. You also want to read some tactical books about doing the job. And so in my case, books that helped me there was User Story Mapping, Continuous Discovery Habits by Teresa Torres, and Don't Make Me Think, which is actually for designers rather than product managers, but gave me like a really good understanding of the mechanics of design. And while I was doing this, I was naively applying to entry-level product manager jobs. No one wanted to talk to me. And it's actually not that surprising, because even though I was a recruiter and I made a living looking at people's resumes and going, they don't have enough experience for this job, I'm not going to talk to them, I perhaps wasn't quick enough to apply that tactic and level of understanding to my own job search. And so, and this is, I hope this is valuable advice, but applying for jobs is easy because it's linear. You can write a nice list of 50 jobs, and you can set yourself a task of doing 10 a day. You can make a nice Trello board with all the different jobs. You can do some research on the company. You can tailor your resume to each one and chuck it in to the mix. And it feels like you're doing something, but it's just an output, not an outcome. The outcome is booking interviews, talking to companies, getting introduced to companies. But when you are very fixated on like changing something in your life, it feels like you have to start doing something from day one. But really, for a lot of folks, and this is true of me, I was wasting my time applying to these jobs because I wasn't differentiated at all. There's no shortage of people who would like to be product managers. And the fact that I could code a bit didn't differentiate me against people who are software engineers with 3 years experience wanting to pivot into product. And so I can code was the wrong thing to try and differentiate myself on, because I was already on the back foot. In this discipline, a very common path is become a software engineer, then pivot into product management. And so if I'm selling myself as I can code, I'm way below the actual people who've like written production level code for 3 years. And I didn't even come to this realization myself. Someone helped me. And so a recruiter at a company that had rejected me, as ever, every time I got rejected, I asked for some feedback. And to her enormous credit, she gave me some feedback. And she said, "You're underqualified." Now, this is for an associate product manager job. This is the entry-level job. And I had 5 or 6 years experience in the working world. I could code, and I was underqualified. And when I pushed back, she said, "Look, you don't have a computer science degree. Like, it doesn't matter that you've taken one computer science class online. You're still underqualified even compared to a graduate." And her candor here was such a gift. Like, radical feedback like that to someone that she had no skin in the game to engage with completely changed my mindset and how I thought about it. And so I then started thinking, not what do I want, which is to become a product manager, but like, who has done this successfully? So I went on LinkedIn, and then I started looking at companies I admired for product managers who worked there who didn't have technical backgrounds. to try and pull out the themes. And again, anyone can do this. This is free. You can just like go on LinkedIn, which is like a phenomenal repository of career histories of people who've done the job you want. And yeah, I would suggest do what I did and reach out to some of these people and ask for advice. But even if you don't do that, just by looking at the profiles, you can start to pattern match and pull out what people have done. And so the first thing that I noticed was a lot of them had MBAs. So I thought that's potentially one path, do an MBA. But then I noticed this second class of profile where people would join a startup in some other role and then have a role internally as a product manager afterwards. So people who join in customer success, people who join in sales, marketing. And when I weighed these two choices up against each other, one, you get saddled with debt. The other, you get paid. So that seemed like a pretty, if I'm going to learn to do something, I'll take the option where I get paid to learn the thing rather than the option where I pay to learn the thing. And so I started trying to identify startups where I thought I would have an unfair advantage to join in any role in the company. And here's how I thought about that. I was a recruiter. And so I thought, what companies would my knowledge of recruitment be an unfair advantage? And what I landed on was companies who sell to HR and talent teams. So companies who make software, B2B software, that is sold to other companies, where the person using the software, their customer, is someone who is a recruiter or something like a recruiter. And I thought that I'd have this unfair advantage because I've used some of this software myself. And at the top of this, we talked about user empathy, talking to your customers, understanding what their wants and needs. And so I targeted companies that were in this HR tech space. And I ended up getting a role in partnerships. Funny story about this as well. This is kind of an example of the luck you get when you're rigorous. My current company, Omnipresent, I'd identified them as a rapidly growing HR tech company, really admired them. And I was going to like DM the founder and shoot my shot for like a job there. And in doing that, I was researching the company. There were like 27 people at this point. This was just before their Series A. And in doing that, one of them saw me look at their profile and reached out to me about a partnership with my current company. And during that call, they actually headhunted me and said, no, you should come work here. And so all of this organic looked like it happened by accident, but was a direct result of the effort I put in doing my due diligence to look at everyone at this company. And as it happened, what they wanted more than anything right then was not a product manager, although I shot my shot for that, but of course they said no. What they wanted more than anything was someone to join their partnerships team who understood recruitment. And so I kind of found myself right in this sweet spot of what they wanted, which is someone who knows about recruitment, who doesn't want to be a recruiter, who can join in partnerships. And once I was in, I made it my absolute mission to add value in my current role because I knew I wouldn't be eligible to pivot internally unless I was exceptional at the job they actually hired me to do. And that's how I then approached that from day one.
I love
Amazing
that story.
Edmund. Yeah. So I've got an admission to make, Edmund. I actually use you as an example of your story or that approach, that exact approach. I didn't know that you'd done all of those steps, but that is basically the approach that I tell people to do. Is like you need to identify the people and the companies that you want to work in, reach out to them, ask them, for an online coffee or a real coffee if they're near you geographically. But yeah, so it's great to catch one out in the wild, so to speak, of someone that's done that methodology, thought really analytically about the problem and how to solve it, and congratulations on making a success of it.
There's something I should flag as well, and I didn't admit this on purpose, but I'm not used to telling the story in such detail, right? Most people don't care to the extent that you guys care, so this is awesome. Here's something that it would be wildly irresponsible of me not to mention. In this 2-year process of wanting to become a product manager, before of these 2 years I've just talked about, the first year was I was trying to gain the skills. The second year was I was inside a startup trying to pivot internally. In that first year, I was working full-time as a recruiter. I reached out to startups who were advertising part-time product manager jobs and offered my services as like an intern. Not instead of my full-time recruitment job, in addition to. And so for 6 months of that year, I was working full-time as a recruiter. there was a YC-backed startup that was in the edtech space, and they taught students about the business world. And I had a role there as a program manager, part-time, teaching classes to students in the evenings. Once I was there doing that, so that's maybe an extra 10 hours a week on top of my full-time job. On my first day at that company, I DM'd the one product manager at this startup, told him exactly what I intended to do, which is become a product manager, asked him what laborious product manager tasks he had that he'd like to give away to me in exchange for some mentorship, and made it clear that I wasn't going to get paid for those bits. I'd get paid for the classes I was teaching, because that was the agreement, but that I would take on, in addition to that, some part-time work. So now I'm working full-time as a recruiter, 10 hours a week teaching the classes to allow me to work 10 hours for free, essentially as an entry-level product manager. And I did that for 6 months. And that meant that when I was pivoting internally at Omnipresent, I suddenly had two unfair advantages. I actually had done work as a product manager and so was overqualified for an entry-level job. And I had knowledge of the company and the customer, having worked there for a year. And I tell that story to say, like, I didn't just pay someone for a 4-week course and become a product manager overnight. I had to have high conviction that if I bet on giving my time, my additional leisure time for free to a company in order to gain skills, I couldn't lose. Because either I would love it and would find it incredibly fulfilling and would be even more reassured that I wanted to do it. Or if you do it for free and you hate it, well, then you shouldn't do it. If you're committing your evenings and weekends to doing something and you don't find any enjoyment for its own sake, for a time-limited period, right? You're saying to your head, I'm going to do this for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Then don't do it. Because if you don't have some intrinsic motivation, some intrinsic joy out of the task, then it's probably not going to be a career that you find fulfilling.
I think that's such a great point, is a lot of people just pick something like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to do this job? But they don't know, especially early on, but they don't know what it actually takes to do that job. So doing something part-time, doing something as a volunteer gives you that experience and then can open your eyes to whether or not I actually like this. Because to your point, if I don't like it in this small capacity, I probably don't want to be doing it all of the time. I also like how your story shows leveraging the background that you had, because I think in a career pivot, a lot of people think they have to shed everything that they studied before or who they were before and really make this full 180 transformation. But your story is building off and using who you were before as a recruiter as a value add into the job that you want. So you're just adding on extra skills, making yourself more marketable. You're not saying, well, that's who I was. I don't want to do anything about that anymore. Now I want to be this, right? You're bridging it all together.
Yeah, you've got to recycle it. Otherwise, you're leaving value on the table. You've got to recycle your story because you're telling, and like, obviously, Lisa and Dale know this because they're like resume writing experts, and I absolutely loved the episode about resumes as a former recruiter as well, who you know, recruiters have spicy opinions about resumes, so it was amazing that I just nodded along to everything. You're telling a story with your resume, and you're telling a story whereby it makes sense that the next chapter is the job you're applying for, and so there needs to be a consistent through line, and only you know how to tell that story. So for example, here's how I told the story. When I was interviewing for product manager jobs, I said, one of the core competencies of a product manager, I imagine, from the research I've done, is getting buy-in from software engineers. You're on a team of 4 to 8 software engineers. There's one of you. You're not their boss, but you're all trying to pull together. Influencing software engineers without authority is one of the core components of being a tech recruiter. You try telling someone on $1 million total comp at Twitter that they're negotiating their salary wrong and you need to do it for them. That is absolutely a way to build up understanding and empathy for engineers by having spoken to maybe about 10,000 of them by some means over my career. And it's true. I have an unfair advantage as a product manager. I have this empathy because when you listen to thousands of engineers tell you why they hate their job and they want to leave it because no one talks to a recruiter when they love their job, you internalize it and you get a real good idea of what the anti-patterns are and what you should avoid doing in interactions with them. And only you can look at your previous career history and pull out those threads of what could make sense. But the most straightforward and tactical thing is in my previous job, what software did I use? Who are companies that make that software or that kind of software? And if you really want to, like, as a product manager, if you want to start like thinking like a product manager, look at the tools that you use on a daily basis. Identify things where you don't love it, some real pain point you have, not like a abstracted, wouldn't it be cool if it did this, but some actual thing that you have, and then just give it to them as feedback. They'll have like a button somewhere on the product to like give feedback. The person who responds to that is probably going to be a product manager. And it helps you starting to think about it and also seeing how like product managers interact with users. Any company will probably be sending out surveys for doing user interviews. Say yes to them, because by being interviewed by a UX researcher or a product manager as a user, you'll start to understand their process. Any opportunity you can have to like interact with people doing the job you want and seeing how they do it is accessible if you're a user of tools. And so just like use more software, like download apps that you think would look interesting, take free trials to stuff in your regular job. Do it with startups because they're going to be more amenable to talking to you because they need that early user feedback to like build out a picture of like how people who build software